the presentation of our guest. Daryl, do you need a little bit? Oh, no, Daryl looks like he's recording already. So Carrie, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Carrie.
I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Bryant Seraphin is the Chief of Police of Urbana Police Department. He was born and raised in the Chicago area. Originally came to U of I in 1990 and never left the area. Well, he did go home to visit, but that's okay. Started with the Urbana Police Department in 1994. Served in a variety of positions, including patrol officer, field training officer. He was a SWAT team member, sergeant and lieutenant of investigations, deputy chief in 2017, and in 2018 he took over as interim chief and then permanently appointed in 2019. Met his wife Tammy when he was down here at the down here in the Champaign, Urbana area. They have twin sons. Volunteer, he does a fair amount of volunteer work in the community. His experience include Little League coach, Park District basketball coach. He's very involved in Boy Scouting. I think as a youth, he was even an Eagle Scout, so that's great, which is good because he likes to spend time outdoors, camping, canoeing, and mountain biking. And one of the most important things, he's also my nephew, so I've got an in at the Urbana Police Department. So that's the big thing. I'd like to introduce Bryant Seraphin.
Well, thank you, Uncle Kerry. I appreciate that. This is the second one of these I've done in about 5 days. So if any of you are also Kiwanians, I apologize. You're going to get the same talk from last week, but I don't recognize any names that seem to be the same as the Kiwanis Club. I would like to also recognize very quickly, it looks like I see Mr. Todd Satterthwaite on the line this morning, who actually swore me in October of 1994 when he was the mayor of Urbana. So it's kind of interesting. I would imagine that Daryl Homan, I see him there. He's probably photographed me at a crime scene or two in the News Gazette over the years. So it's always fun to kind of see who's on some of these different groups, because you all have your names up, which is really helpful for detectives. A lot of times when you see a group in person, I might not know everybody's name. So thank you this morning. Carrie, real fast, do you have an exact time frame for me this morning before I prattle on too long as to how long you guys would like me to be up here this morning?
If you want to go 20, 25 minutes, that's fine. Okay. And then leave some time for some questions.
Okay. All right, well, good. Then I will start. Two things I noticed this morning when I jumped on. You guys were sort of having some chat about roofing. And anytime people want to complain about the maybe police work and some of the current state of events and affairs, and I look at the officers and I said, well, if you don't like this, you can always go back to roofing, because I did that throughout college, and that is some real work there for sure. And the other thing I wanted to mention, Mary, you had the opening song with the a cappella group singing, and it was lovely. And there was a fella off to the right-hand side standing in the field with this lovely long mullet of hair, because it was a little bit older. And yes, I had a lovely long mullet of hair 25 years ago, not anymore. So I was asked it's interesting. Most groups will say, hey, can you come talk to kids about this? We'd like to talk about internet safety and some of those things, or we want you to talk about building safety, or this was a little more open-ended. And as I was contemplating some remarks, I had been thinking about it, and something that I would sort of say kind of flippantly occasionally was, people would ask me, well, what is it like policing? And I'll say, well, it's kind of like refereeing life. And so this morning, what I want to do is kind of go through a few analogies. We'll start with some easy ones. I'll graduate up to some harder ones. But I enjoy sports a lot. If you'll see behind me, I've got my Lovie Smith autographed poster and my Bears bucket and White Sox tins behind me here in the basement, because that's where I get relegated to at the house. So hopefully this will be a vehicle that I can share a little information for you and actually share some stuff that people don't know about the police department itself. So some of the things that I started with doing a little bit of research, and evidently the first formalized police department in the United States was Boston in 1838. But interestingly enough, Urbana wasn't too far behind. About 5 years ago, we had a big celebration for 100, and I think it was 65 years, 160 years. We have actually, Urbana in 1855 had when they were incorporated as a city, actually incorporated their police department. And at the time it was the town marshal or something, which maybe is a cooler name than police chief, but in 1855. So we've been around doing this for a long time. With regards to refereeing life, we start kind of funny with something that's very easy. And it allows me to have a story to illustrate this. One of the things about policing that's similar to refereeing, or sports, if you will, is the idea of this jurisdiction, this court where we play the game. And in soccer, I guess I've had to learn over the years about the soccer pitch or the baseball diamond. You get the point. But jurisdiction in policing is every bit as important. And most citizens don't necessarily even know that. As you drive through our area, there seems to be a bunch of different police departments, and kind of how do they sort of all interact and work together, and where does one start and the other one stop? It's actually can be quite technical. So you have Champaign on the west, you have Urbana on the east, and the Urbana Police Department, or excuse me, the U of I Police Department focuses on the university property itself, which I find sort of interesting. Back, we had a shooting 20 years ago, and the University of Illinois student who was shot was on a sidewalk in campus on Goodwin Avenue, just south of Green Street. The bullet went through his thigh. Ultimately, he was okay, but it went through his thigh and into a university building. So we have a U of I student in the campus area. The bullet has lodged into a university building, but the sidewalk where the student was standing was maintained by Urbana. As such, it is Urbana's case to work. So sometimes people will ask me, well, how do you guys determine that it can actually be that quite that specific? Like referees, we have uniforms. I can't keep track of all the uniforms. We have a manual that's 20 plus pages long about police uniforms. It almost would be easy if they just wore the zebra black and white shirts and went out, and when we got calls for service, we could referee things that way. But we don't. We have hot weather uniforms, cold weather uniforms. When I started, it was a much more formal looking attire a quarter of a century ago, with actual metallic accoutrement and badges and pressed slacks. And now the officers usually wear exterior vest covers. You might see those so they can take them off and get some air underneath them. They have cargo pocketed pants, no badges to fall off and get lost. Everything's embroidered on. Many years ago, we had ended up in a wrestling match with a man that we had to arrest, and I got to the county jail and I looked down and I realized, the badge on my shirt is gone. I don't want to tell the chief that I've lost my badge, so I have to go back now to the lady's front yard where we had been wrestling and arresting her son an hour earlier with my flashlight looking for my badge. She sticks her head out and says, "Hey, what are you looking for?" I'm terrified to tell her that I've lost my badge in her front yard. And how embarrassing would that be? I didn't necessarily want her ne'er-do-well son to bond out of jail and come find it. So, I've lost my favorite pen. I think I've just found it. Good day, ma'am. And I wandered off and ultimately was able to find it. But so we have uniforms. A question I get a lot is about manning and staffing and how many officers actually work there. And if you didn't know, in NCAA football and in NFL football, there are actually 7 referees on the field. So I like to use that because on a good day, we have 7 referees who work at the Urbana Police Department on the street at any particular or any given time. We have the department divided up into 3 divisions, where we have a patrol division, which is the one that most people see and know all the time. Most of you would, if you have any interactions, that's where you, those are those patrol officers. That's the backbone. They're the ones that have to show up 24/7, 365, Christmas, New Year's. Those are the officers that people normally see. We will have 8 officers assigned to a shift, and our department works a 12-hour shift arrangement. So by the end of the day, they're done. I worked this shift. When I started, we were on 8 hours, and then the department switched to a 12-hour shift in 1998, and we've done it that way ever since. The idea is that the officers, while they're working, you're working, but when you're off, you actually get a time to decompress and get away. And one of the nice things is that our officers will have there's a set pattern: 2 on, 2 off, 3 on, 2 off. At any rate, every other weekend is a 3-day weekend. And so while you might make a few $1,000s more at Champaign per year, you do get every other weekend off at Urbana. So that's my recruiting pitch for anybody that's looking to change jobs or anything now. That's a nice feature for most of our folks. The other 2 divisions that we have, in addition to that patrol division, are the detectives, and then within them is a subset of street crimes task force. So as most people know, in town here in the Champaign-Urbana area, we have been over the last 5 years, similar to other metropolitan areas across the state, have battled gun violence issues. And that street crimes task force, that's it's a joint group with officers from the sheriff's department, the university police, Champaign and Urbana. And those it's a multi-agency team of detectives, and that's where they focus a lot of their efforts. So they are invaluable right now, for sure. And then, of course, everybody's favorite division is the services division at the department, which has all of the paperwork involved. They're in charge of all they do a lot of all the report management and permit assist in routing permit things with regards to plans for parades and other events. And that division, staffed mostly with civilians, is clearly the one that makes sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So most of the time, when similar to referees, you have 2 teams on the field, a lot of the times when we are called, there are 2 feuding parties in some way, shape, or form. People generally don't call us when things are going great. Nobody needs the police around at that time. But when things go bad, we get called, and that's when our officers have to act. The interesting thing is, and I liken this again to refereeing, if the game is going well, if there's a lot of flow in a good basketball game, you don't even hardly notice the referees. And that's hopefully what with regards to policing. Current events, of course, have called into question a lot of those things, but that's sort of our goal. We don't want to necessarily always be out front. We are better in policing at dealing with acute events like bank robberies or murders, those kinds of things. That our skills, the tools that we have, usually work better for us in those types of events. Where we can sometimes struggle is neighbor disputes, and when one neighbor is upset with the other neighbor next door about, well, they've got this and they've mowed too far into my yard, or I don't like where their fence is placed, I'm calling the police. Those are the kinds of things that we aren't necessarily quite as well equipped to handle. And so that's when we'll try to make sure that we do our best. And this is where I think some of the term community policing comes in, where we're trying to negotiate some of these things and trying to get people to get along. I laugh when sometimes you see as events might start to spiral in a sporting event. And the commentators might say, oh, it's getting a little chippy out here in this basketball game right here. And the guys are barking at each other. And you'll see the referees might come over and put a hand on somebody's waist and kind of guide him off to the side and have a conversation before they have to do some sort of enforcement action like a technical foul or something else. That's something that we that we aspire to. I don't know that we always do it perfectly, but is enforcement actually part of what we need right here, right now? And that's something that we do try to do. It's one of the other things that I find interesting as I was thinking about some of these things in different sporting events, and as we're watching the Illini and Kofi Coburn goes up and hacks somebody in the lane, you might see them sort of raise it. They blow the whistle and they raise their hand and they sort of admit their guilt, if you will. Yeah, that was me. I got him good. And he goes to the line and shoots his two. The opposing player will go shoot their free throws. It's not uncommon, although maybe not as common as we would like, for us when we deal with certain offenders, suspects. Well, they will do the same exact thing. We had several years ago now, we had an unfortunate incident with an officer-involved shooting, where when there was a domestic dispute, a man was coming down his driveway as the first officer arrived, and he was holding his hand down by his thighs, keeping it out of sight and hidden. And the officer was, show me your hands, show me your hands. And I don't remember all the details right now. And at some point, the young man decides to raise his hand, pointing it toward the officer, and in it was a gun. The officer fired one shot, hit the man in the leg. He dropped the gun, and the threat was over. And so in those instances, in Champaign County, we have a multi-agency team that investigates officer-involved events like that. Serious uses of force, whether they end in death or great bodily harm, in custody deaths, those kinds of things. So this team of all these detectives come out to work on this event. And the young man, fortunately, wasn't, despite it being a gunshot, wasn't hurt horribly. He went to the hospital, received his treatment, and he was actually back on the scene as the crime scene detectives were still taking their photographs and measurements and doing things. So he had to sit on his front stoop while the detectives were finishing up. And during some of these interactions, at some point, the young man said, yeah, I did it. I shouldn't have brought the gun out around me from the backyard there that I had. So again, admitting his guilt. He unfortunately was probably suffered a little more than giving the other team 2 free throws. But occasionally we do have events where somebody does actually admit their wrongdoing. One of the other things that I find interesting in making this comparison is sort of this gray area in the middle when it comes to what's a foul. Was that really a pass interference? I don't think that was. We all sit and watch the Bears on Sunday, of course, right? I don't have any Packer fans here, do I? Jared, oh geez. What kind of car do you drive? Oh. But everybody watches these games, and we're trying to look at this, and oh geez, you even brush Aaron Rodgers, and they're throwing you the penalty flag, and on and on. And so similar, and there are some, however, that we all agree are very these things are egregious, and we're like, we got it with that. No, that's a good flag. The speeding, for instance, most citizens have interactions with the police during a traffic stop. Our traffic stop numbers for 2020, due to the pandemic, will be all sorts of screwed up, and we've stopped, so the numbers are way down. And so I don't know, this year is maybe a good example, but traditionally most citizens have interaction with the police during a traffic stop. Urbana traditionally makes somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 4,000 traffic stops every year. And if I use speeding as an example, if we're talking about a general 30-mile-an-hour residential zone, most people would say, okay, if they're driving 60, yeah, that's ridiculous. They should get a ticket. And if they're driving 30, well, they're in the speed limit. They shouldn't. But as I take that, we start to smush those together, it sort of becomes a little bit of a question then, and we get into some of these gray areas. Is 35 okay? How about 40? 45, or well, is it a school zone? Is it busy? Are there lots of city? And so there's all these extra variables that start to kind of come into that equation. I used to usually give 10 miles an hour, and I actually made traffic stops because that seemed to give 10 because, well, probably most police probably take 10. So, okay, so we'll do it at 10. But as you move then and sort of start cranking up higher, I used to, in my mind, we had 10 would be no bother, 11 and 12 stop in warning, and at 13 we start going 43, 44, 45. You're probably going to get a ticket from me on South Ray Street if you're speeding to work. But does it matter what you're speeding for? So some of these things, they can become sort of complex kind of quickly, and it sort of depends. Do you live on the street or not? Citizens will often say, if they live on that street, by God, it's too fast. Everybody's driving too fast. I'm calling the chief. People are going too fast. But what is too fast? How often is traffic on that street? So it's sort of a low-level example, but it is one that sort of illustrates the point, kind of between that foul. When do we want the police to throw the flag? When it even comes to speeding. If we have these kind of discussions on speeding, as it gets even more complex into issues of domestic violence and sex abuse cases and some of these other things, some of those issues can filter in. The other thing, and I'll one of the other issues that I liked when it comes to the similarities. So when I talked to the Kiwanis Club last week, I had said I had no intention of ever coaching Little League. I wasn't a great baseball player, but I signed my two sons up and away we went. And the first day, the coach that was there, Coach Mike, God bless him, he had a couple of college softball player girls there that were there to help him. I said, this is great. So I watched, no problem. And then I showed up for the second practice, and the college help, they were just there for the first practice to kind of get him started. Then he was on his own. And I watched the poor man as he's trying to get whatever we had, a dozen kids, and they're chasing balls and dandelions. And I looked at in butterflies, and it was just a mess. And I asked Mike, I said, Mike, listen, I don't know a whole lot about baseball, but I can herd cats. Let me help you. And so that started 6 years. I can remember even telling my mom that I was coaching Little League, and she said, you're coaching, but you weren't any good. I go, you don't have to be good. That's the beautiful thing about this. I said, and with YouTube nowadays, if you don't know the proper footwork, there's somebody posted some video on what the proper footwork is for the first baseman. So you can always just look it up. And that's what I did. And 6 years later, I finally hung up my Little League whistle. But when I was doing that, I had to learn a little bit about some of the umping, because for those who have done this, not only do Little League coaches, especially at the earliest levels, coach and corral, they also have to do some umping. And while doing some of the research, I watched as and learned about baseball umpiring, the idea about them waiting to gather all the facts. So when somebody is sliding into second base, everybody's excited, they're watching this whole thing. And we all want the ump to, he's out right away. But if you sort of watch some of them, they actually have been, when they do some of their instruction, they're watching them. Is the foot, not only are they watching that foot, does the player hang on to the ball, or does it pop out of his glove? And I like to watch the umpires, or sometimes they'll watch the whole thing and say, yep, I've got all the facts, and now I'm going to ring him up, or now I'm going to make the call. Similarly, when we talk to our police officers, I want them to gather all of the information. Now, we're not building rockets and sending people to the moon. I stole something from a guy down at the University of Louisville. I attended a class down there on major case workups and how to investigate major cases. And Charles Hemp was his name. And Charles used to say, there's only 4 building blocks, people. We talk to victims, we talk to suspects, we talk to offenders, and we examine the crime scene and do physical evidence. Now that's expanded maybe a little bit into phones and computers, but essentially it's the same. sort of thing. And so that's what we tell the officers. You would get all your 4 building blocks done, and whether it's a murder or whether it's a barking dog. Now, in a barking dog, people sort of say, well, that's stupid. What are you talking about? 4 building blocks and a murder? Well, somebody is calling to complain about a barking dog. So, well, I have a victim, if you will. And a matter of fact, I might have to talk to them, and they might have their neighbor, the other neighbor on the other side. Yep, that dog barks all the time. Well, there's a witness. So then I go over and we send the officer out, and they get out of the car. No, I can hear the barking. I can hear the dog, and it's 2:30 in the morning. I can hear it. So there's my crime scene, physical evidence, if you will. And then we go talk to the owner of the dog and hopefully get it deal with it in a conversation as opposed to a city ticket. So the same sort of, so we overlay that template on a lot of things for the officers, and usually if they do that, we'll get a reasonable result. And of course, like sports, like the NFL, things happen, and we immediately then have to pass a new rule, a law in police work, but a rule in the NFC. So the NFC championship game after the 2018 season, that was the Saints versus the Rams, and there was a horrible no call on a pass interference play at the end. How could the ref have missed this? This is ridiculous. We have to do something about it. And Sean Payton, the coach of the Saints, was all there. And so, by God, what do? They pass this sort of pass interference replay rule that went into effect last year. What a ridiculous! It was horribly instituted. The refs didn't know how to enforce it. There was confusion about is it a higher standard to call it after the fact than if they called it live, et cetera, et cetera. And then they did it last year in a trial, and they're not using that rule again this year. Laws change too, and then police have to be able to sort of adapt and change. And what maybe sounds easy in Springfield, when you have to operationalize all those things, and in our case, just get 59 officers kind of go in the same direction. I can't imagine trying to get the Chicago Police Department to get their 12,000 officers go in the same direction. How do we do some of these things? Cannabis is been illegal. Wait, no, it's legal now, but only in these really certain specific conditions that have to be met. Several years ago, there was a change in Illinois. When I started, 17 was the age of adult for criminal justice issues. And the state wanted to make it 18, but our legislatures couldn't quite make the jump right away from 17 to 18. So they made us, for a couple of years, have a sort of a segue time period where we had, all right, well, if it's a misdemeanor and they're 17, they're juvenile. But if they commit a felony at 17, then that's an adult. Oh, okay, well, that sounds good, right? And well, that sounds good, except a battery in a park, a fight in a park is a battery in a public place. That's an ag battery. That's a felony. So 2 kids fighting in the park at 17, did they really want them to be felons on this? Or is this supposed to be misdemeanors and have them be juveniles and deal with it in that venue? So again, I laugh when we have all these great ideas, but how do you operationalize those things? And I guess finally I'll end with things like, just like referees, the police and the referees, we both get booed. We make bad calls. We don't always get it right. And so the current climate that we're in, there's a lot of change. And it's trying to, some of these issues that I've spoken about already this morning is okay, so we've passed this law. How do we really want it enforced though? And how do you, and what is the intent of the laws? Recently throughout town, we've had a variety of executive emergency orders passed by both mayors regarding the COVID-19. How do we enforce that? We've just heard from we want the community, we want the police to be disengaged, and do cops need to do these particular things? Do we want policemen going to mental health issues? And how do we do some of these, how do we do these things? And then we spin around right away and say, well, we've got to pass all these COVID things, and well, who's going to enforce it? Well, people look around the room. How about public health? And well, no, it's the police. And so that's been one of our struggles over the course of all of these years. When certain things happen, there's nobody else to call. When someone dials 911, you either send the fire department or the police department. And the fire department's done a much better job of carving out their fire thing and maybe we come to traffic crashes or health first aid things. And if it doesn't fit into that bucket, send the cops. They'll figure it out. And so some of those issues are the things that we kind of struggle with. And we've been able to at least kickstart a lot of conversation now about, well, why is it that we go to these particular things? And so when we examine issues like the people in crisis, mental health crises and those things, do we want the police going to all of those things? I think most people would say, well, no, we don't need to. And that's fine until the guy jumps out of a car with a machete on 74, and what's a real event. And so, well, he's in a mental health crisis. Look at him. Well, that's true, but there aren't many social workers that want to go respond to that. And so how do we pair up in these things, and how do we hand off? And those are some of the conversations that we're having right now. Like I said, occasionally we don't make the right call, and we get booed just like the ref. So I think I did more than my 20 minutes, Carrie. So I will politely, if you guys got some questions, I know the Kiwanis Club the other week they used the chat feature, or if you guys want to just shout something out, I'll do my best, and I'll be quiet just for a second.
Sure. What has changed most since you started in the early 90s? How different is that picture today from then?
What has changed the most? I think it's I guess I have a couple of responses to that. And not that it's bad, but it's the recording of everything that we do, and not just even the citizens and cell phones, which are out all the time, but even what we ask the officers to do. So when I started, there was and I guess this speaks to technology. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving helped us to facilitate VCRs in the trunks of the squad car. And at the beginning of your shift, you had to open up the trunk and make sure there was a VHS tape in there that had a date and a time on it. And then we would drive. And if you had, there was a little monitor with a button, and you had to hit that button and activate it if something needed to be recorded. Now, cameras are everywhere, and the officers, the squad car has 4 cameras on it. There are, I guess one is the body cam of the officer. So there's, I guess, technically 3 in the car, one that the officer actually wears. But there's a wide angled fisheye view out the front. There's a narrow high def view with a narrower field, and then there's a video of the back seat. And then the officer wears their body camera. So in any one event, there are 4 video streams feeding in. And we've had to review certain events. And at one point, I did chuckle. I said, well, it's kind of like Monday Night Football. Look at us here. We got all these different angles. Let's cut to the side zone. Let's cut to the end zone camera. And let's look at this. So I think technology is one of the biggest things that has changed. And I guess that would be it. With regards to the current climate's another component that's changed some, but that's sort of ebbed and flowed. I've talked to officers from the 60s who would say that, some of the pushback now is that they've seen is similar to what it was like working then. But that's, I guess that's a couple of answers.
Cool. I've got a question, Bryant. Several years ago, I was on a jury in a murder case, and they had a ballistics expert from the state police come and talk about, because there were several shots fired, that kind of thing. And he talked about the ricochet effect of bullets, and why sometimes even if an officer sees a suspect fleeing with a gun or a knife or whatever, they don't shoot because they're afraid of the residual effect if they miss, or even sometimes if it goes through the suspect, how far those bullets can travel and ricochet off things?
I I am not a ballistics expert. It's interesting when you talked about the residual. You said, I think it was residual effect, and I think there are a couple of things that, yes, when that bullet leaves the muzzle, how far it goes and where it goes can be affected by a variety of things. Drywall doesn't stop much. Car engine block or a 100-year-old oak tree will do a pretty good job of stopping things. The other thing that I thought of when you spoke of residual effect was the idea of right now some of the action is, well, when do we shoot and how do we shoot, and some of those types of things. The most straight line, easy guidance is we shoot to terminate life-threatening behavior. And that's, if guys keep that in mind, and our gals, and there's all sorts of annual training on use of force and other things that we have to do. And if anybody likes 4-hour city council meetings, we've had a couple of those lately where we're discussing the police use of force policy in Urbana. And those types of things kind of can be long and involved and draw out a lot of different variables where we try to, but usually when it comes to some of these deadly force things, it's terminating life-threatening behavior. When the behavior stops, the officer's supposed to stop.
And I don't want to stop the questions, but I do want to go ahead. I'm going to close the meeting, and if Brian wouldn't mind staying around for a few more minutes, I'm sure there's more questions.
I'm good until probably about 5 to 8, so I can sign on to a meeting with the superintendent of the schools. So.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and close this meeting. Give me just a second here to share my screen and get this rolling again. Yes, first, there we go. Just to let you know, next week, Robert Lawless, U of I law professor, will be coming to speak to us. I think he's talking about bankruptcies in the time of COVID or something to that effect. And if Rod could say the 4-way test for us.
Certainly. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And lastly, is it fun?
And with that, the meeting is officially over, but please stay around and talk to Brian a little bit longer. I know there are probably more questions out there.
Great. Thank you, Bryant.